I'm live. Well, welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. Clarence, you want to lead us in and we'll get going?
Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for all the blessings you bestow on us every day. Thank you that we grew up in a nation that believes in you mostly. Lord, I pray that you would be with each of us as we vote Tuesday, and I pray that we would vote for the candidate that you would have us vote for, Lord. Lord, I pray that our grandkids and great-grandkids we get to grow up in a free country. Be with us tonight as we learn your word. Help us to do your will. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
All righty. So, question for you guys is, how many of you have ever heard any teaching on the Ice Age? You have? Clarence has? So it's kind of that mystery thing that no one really talks about. But I felt like we need to talk about it because there's a lot of information out there on it and a lot of misinformation at that. In fact, through tonight, you're going to see that the secularists really don't know what caused the Ice Age. They really don't. They're kind of at a big guess. But once again, I don't know how it happens. The Bible gives an answer for the Ice Age. Isn't that amazing? But it was a real thing that happened in real time and real history. We can see it. This is part one, by the way. Part two, I'm going to show you some examples of why we know the Ice Age happened. So we can see physical evidence of the Ice Age, and then we can witness things. Have you ever heard of the woolly mammoth before? You know, frozen in time, right? And, you know, that was a event the Ice Age caused those woolly mammoths to freeze. They know that. They know that. So it was a real-time thing that happened, but no one really ever talks about it. The only time you're going to hear about the Ice Age, and I found this kind of interesting, is when I started doing some research this week on the Ice Age from a secular point of view. There's this little disclaimer that always kept popping up on YouTube. And the disclaimer always said something to this effect, that the Ice Age happened, but climate change is a man-made thing. And you know, it's because what the secularists know is the Ice Age is still causing climate change on this earth. It is. And you're going to see that here in a second. And I'm going to show that to you, what the secularists believe. But they want to always throw that little disclaimer in because of carbon emissions. You know, those bad old carbon emissions that's really hampering the next Ice Age. So that's kind of the mystery, and we'll unpack that a little bit and learn about the Ice Age and what really happened. So let's get going. And is there a Bible verse that talks about the Ice Age? It could be. And I'm going to show you here in a second. So what's the oldest book in the Bible that we think is the oldest book in the Bible? The book of Job, right? And we believe that book was written around what time frame? You don't have to give me a year. Just give me, was it before the patriarchs? Was it pre-Moses? What time do you think it was? So, it was pre-Moses. We know that, right? Because if it's the oldest book and Moses wrote the first 5 books, right? So, therefore, it had to be pre-Moses. We could deduce that, couldn't we? So, in the book of Job, in Job 38, 29 through 30, for those womb comes the ice, and the frost of heaven who gives it birth, the waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. What does that sound like to you? Sounds like ice, doesn't it? Well, let's keep reading. it does sound like ice, and unless Job himself went up on a mountain, during some cold weather, we don't really know. Saw some ice on the mountain and had this verse. Or he could have witnessed the ice age, or, he could have gone further north in latitude and seen the ice age for himself. We really don't know. But I thought that was a pretty cool verse, and it kind of almost gives me the want to that Job witnessed the ice age. So, if you ask a youngster the question, was there really an ice age? They might say rather quickly that there was. They may tell you that there were two of them. Right, they sure would. Of course, if you listen much longer, they'll tell you they saw both on the movies at the Movie Zone Theater, right? So everybody knows about the Ice Age, but no one knows anything about the Ice Age. I'm just saying. And I had to go to school this week about the Ice Age and learn about a lot of things here. So the Ice Age is a popular topic that's often discussed in school or at home or in Hollywood, but sadly, most people hear the secular uniformitarian view and don't look at the subject from a biblical perspective. Now, this word right here, uniformitarian, I've talked about that before. What does that mean? What's the definition of a uniformitarian view? That's correct. Well, kinda, yeah. So the observation that we see scientifically, we can observe ice melting at a certain temperature, right? So the uniformitarian view says it's always been that way. Or it could be that the moon rotates around the earth at a certain speed. It's always been that way. So what we see in the present is the key to the past. That's the uniformitarian view. But what the uniformitarian view neglects is, we had this thing called the flood. And the flood changed things, right? Prior to the flood, what was the earth like? Remember? Warm. The waters came up from the earth, right? We don't believe it rained during that time, pre-flood. Do what? Possibly, yeah. But, then the flood happened, and then what happened to the earth? Everything changed. So, from a secular perspective, we can't use the uniformitarian principle because they're the keys to the things that happen in the present are the key to the past. We can't rely on that because the flood changed everything that we know. So we have to look at everything from a biblical perspective. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the Ice Age, is because our kids are being, once again, I'm going to say this again, our kids are being bombarded by secular reasoning. And I'm going to show you here in a second a slide or several slides of what is being taught to the kids in the textbooks about the Ice Age. So let's keep moving forward here. So what is an Ice Age? Well, how is it defined? It's a time when extensive glacial activity in which substantially more of the land is covered by ice. So during the Ice Age that ended several thousand years ago, a biblical perspective, several thousand years ago, 30% of the land surface of the earth was covered by ice. If you were honest with yourself, and if I quizzed you and said, during the Ice Age, how much of the land of the earth was in ice, what would have been your percentage? What would you say? You would have said all of it, right? Because that's what we think of as in the Ice Age. Oh, the whole earth is one big ball of ice. But that's not true. Only 30%. In fact, they can go back and look at the glacier activity, and I'm going to show you this next week in part 2, but we can see the evidence of the Ice Age. And one thing the secularists and the biblical perspective agree on this one point here, that 30%, because they can see real live evidence. And if we have the live, or see the past evidence, not the live evidence, we can see evidence of striations of rock where glaciers have moved and scratched the rock. We can see moraines where the glaciers moved and pushed dirt out of the way, and big boulders were moved by the ice age. So we can see that, and we can deduce that 30% of the earth at this time was covered by ice. So this is what it looks like, and this is actually from a secularist website that I picked up. From a biblical, if I went to a more creationist website, exact same map. All right? So Africa, South America, most of the United States from about the Minnesota down south, not in ice. All New England, Michigan, the Dakotas, Montana. You see Alaska way up here, ice. And then you look over here, in Europe and Russia, Siberia, all ice. So and the polar cap up here. So all ice. So let's look at the secular viewpoint of what they say about the Ice Age. So the idea of an Ice Age has sparked much controversy as well as much imagination. Keyword, imagination. In the framework of Earth that is billions of years old, it is believed that there have been many Ice Ages. Many. How many do we believe in? Do we? One Ice Age. But they have many in their hypothesis. These are to believe to have been different length and intensity, with several covering the entire globe in a snowball Earth scenario. But the problem with that is how life would be able to evolve during these periods is fully not understood. So some secular scientists say, well, the Earth was covered with ice, and then the other secular scientists say, well, not really, because how could the animals survive? If the Earth is frozen, what are they going to eat? What are they going to survive on? Short-haired dogs would have what? Elephants that didn't have long hair like woolly mammoths would have. Rhinoceroses would have. Dinosaurs would have. Right? They're reptilian, right? So they're banging heads with one another because they can't figure it out, and it gets worse for them. There are many more problems for the long age ideas of Ice Ages. The most significant problem is the explanation of a mechanism that could turn Ice Age on and off. So, if the Earth is how many billions of years old, according to their theory? Remember? 4.5 billion years old. The universe is 13 billion. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So what they believe is that this Ice Age goes on a cycle, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second, but about every 100,000 years or million years, it goes through a new cycle. Well, how many million are in a billion, by the way? 1,000, right? So that's a lot of cycles, a lot of Ice Ages. So they've got a problem here is, how do you turn an Ice Age on and how do you switch it off? What is that mechanism? They really don't know. They really don't know. So using uniformitarian principles, there it is again. What is uniformitarianism? The present is key to the past. There is no way to explain in a consistent manner how even a single Ice Age could occur, let alone over millions of years. They don't even know how one Ice Age could happen. Not one. Now, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this and give you some of their best reasoning, but it's still flawed. So here's what your textbooks, the public textbooks, public schools say about an ice age. Multiple ice ages have occurred over hundreds of millions of years and caused mass extinctions. What was that other thing that caused a mass extinction on the earth? An asteroid, right? That's one that they talk about. That killed the what? Amazingly, it killed the dinosaurs, but it didn't kill the dogs and cats and the birds. That asteroid targeted, the pesky old dinosaurs, killed off them. So your textbooks say that multiple ice ages have occurred. What else? The last ice age began over 2 million years ago and ended about 10,000 years ago. It's a long ice age. That's a long one. What else do they say? The earth was once covered with ice, but most glaciers formed over thousands of years and left behind distinct features. The only truth to that bullet point is they left behind distinct features. That's the only truth about that statement. Let's keep going. Evidence of past climates is recorded not 10, but in the layers and air bubbles of ice deposits. There's truth to that. Mammals evolved to be large and hairy to survive the last ice age. Interesting. What animals evolved to do that? I just said it. Woolly mammoths, right? Because what do they find in Siberia and other locations? Woolly mammoths, right? In fact, I'm not even going to jump into woolly mammoths because that's next time. That's part 2 of the Ice Age. But what's the key word here? In this sentence here, what is the key word that stands out to you the most? Evolved, right? Did they really evolve? Or was it already coded in their DNA? It just got switched on. I would agree with switched on. I'm sorry?
They got cold. They got air.
Yes, right. Land bridges allowed people and animals to move between the continents 20,000 years ago. I want you to hold on to this one right here. Now, this one I agree with, except for this part, 20,000 years ago. And I'm going to talk about these land bridges because I think the Ice Age is a key thing. If people ask you, all right, Noah gets off the ark, and his sons get off the ark, and his daughter-in-laws get off the ark, and they start having kids, right? And then the population starts to grow. How did those people groups, and especially after the Tower of Babel, God, when he dispersed all the people from the tower, how did those people get all over the earth? You ever been asked that question? How did they get from where we think in the Middle East, where these people groups were, how did they get to America? How did they get to Australia? It's an island, basically, right? It's a continent island. You ever been asked that? All right, Mr. Christian, you smart guy, tell me how these people got over there if the Tower of Babel is real. Very interesting. So we're going to come back to this one, these land bridges. Pretty interesting. Okay. So one popular idea from the secularists, and there are many, is the Malevich mechanism. Easy for me to say. He was I don't know if he was Russian. I didn't search into his life, but I know he's from somewhere in Europe or Asia. But he came up with this mechanism, and this is the one that they hold on to. And in fact, I'm going to show you a video of it here in a second. So the Malevich mechanism suggests that the atmosphere cooled as the sun moves with respect to the sun in 3 different ways. Now, here's where you got to pay attention. So this mechanism, as the sun the earth moves in what type of orbit around the sun? An elliptical orbit, right? All right. And is the sun or is the earth on a tilt on its axis? All right. Is that why we have seasons? That's correct, right? So as the earth is tilted away from the sun, which part of the earth is getting the most heat? The southern part. As it goes around, and now it's this way, and we're just leaving this, aren't we? And we're starting to go back more to this, aren't we? As November, December, January comes. So remember the tilt of the earth going around the sun in an elliptical path. Remember that. All right. So here's how the earth moves in respect to the sun in 3 different ways. This is the theory he came up with. So number 1, the Earth's orbit goes from a circular or to a circle to an ellipse after a 100,000-year cycle. So every 100,000 years, Jupiter and Saturn are pulling on the Earth. He deduced this and said, now instead of going from this elliptical, you're going to go to more circular. Therefore, your sun or your sunny days and your cold days are going to get shorter or longer. All right? So we got to keep going here. The tilt of the axis changes over a 41,000-year cycle. So right now it's on a 25.5 degree tilt, I think, and it changes, it wobbles. He deduced this, that the earth does this, which affects the tilt, which affects how much sunlight we get. Are you still with me? All right. The axis wobbles on a 25,700 year cycle. So he came up with all these formulas. This was back in, early 1900s. So he came up with these 3 ideas that this is how we're going to come up with the Ice Age. Sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it, so far? All righty. So this, if you think about it, and what he was trying to say, this may cause cooler temperatures, but how did it account for all the increased precipitation? He did this, and he changed the earth, and went from this to this and that, but what accounted for all the extra snow? How did he account for that? There's no way to account for that. So that kind of blows his theory out of the water. If you're going to have cooling of the earth, you got to have something to create that ice, right? What is ice made out of? Right. So where do you get all that water from up on the continents? Remember I showed you that 30% of the world was covered by ice? How did all that ice get on top of the continents if you don't have what? Precipitation, right? But he can't, in this theory, where did you see anything about more rain? It caused more rain. You didn't. All you saw was a mechanism to give it a colder temperature. Agreed? All right. So his theory, when tested, it really doesn't hold water. And a lot of the young secular scientists go, that doesn't work either. And they go back to the drawing board and they're all scratching their heads coming up with a different theory. Gotta love that, don't you? All right. How did it occur or account for cooler continents? Because if the ground, is not a certain temperature, we all see it right here. If it snows tonight, what's going to happen to that snow when it hits the ground? It's going to melt. So you got to get the continents really cold, don't you, in order for that to stay. In fact, we all witness it. We get a big snow here, and it stays. What is freezing? 32 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So if it stayed 32 degrees Fahrenheit and it snowed a foot tonight, would we still have a foot of snow on the ground tomorrow? No, we're not. Because what? The radiation from the sun is going to start melting that. So you have to get the land to about 14 degrees before it starts, the thermal, part of the earth is not going to melt the snow, because the sun's melting the snow and the thermal, what's underneath the earth, is melting the snow as well, right? So how did it count for cooler continents? It still doesn't do it. Still doesn't do it. So his theory, being the leading theory, by the way, is out. So, all right, guy. I can sit here and do this all night. Do what? That's what I'm doing. Oh, there we go. Don't make me throw this up there. Okay. So, this is from PBS.
Earth's climate shifts between short periods of warm and long periods of frigid cold. Based on past patterns, there's reason to think that the current warm period might be nearly done. Is the Ice Age coming back? Or will human activity swing us wildly in the opposite direction?
What human activity was he talking about? No, they don't call it global warming anymore. What do they call it? They've changed it, right? It's climate change. And what's causing climate change? John Woods' cows, okay? All right, let's keep going. All right.
We live in an ice age. Our geological period is the Quaternary and is characterized by massive glaciation. Vast ice sheets stretching from the Arctic all the way down to the Missouri River, through Siberia, much of Europe, and spreading out from all major mountain ranges. Okay, sure. Right now, we're in a brief interglacial phase, a relatively summary stretch in which the glaciers have retreated. But these interglacial periods are short-lived. The Quaternary Ice Age has lasted 2.5 million years so far. Its 10 to 15,000 year warm patches are separated by glacial periods that last several times as long. The current respite is called the Holocene era. It began around 11,000 years ago. Temperatures rose, glaciers and woolly mammoths migrated north, and humans thrived. This new era of warmth and plenty saw the rise of agriculture, writing, cities, and technology. All of our recorded, even our...
I want to pause right there. He's talking about civilizations really started thriving here, didn't he? About how many years ago? About 11,000 years ago. What else was significant about the earth? What did he say? It was what? It was warm. And then here comes this pesky ice age, all right? Now, I want you to listen very closely to the words coming out of his mouth. Could, might, maybe. Keep listening to this, okay?
Now remembered history is of the Holocene. You might forgive us for imagining that these relatively summary millennia are normal for this planet. That is not the case. The current interglacial is already long. Does this mean that the glaciers are overdue? Is winter coming? To answer these questions, we need to understand what triggers the march of the glaciers and why they eventually retreat. In fact, we know the broad answer to this, even if the details are under debate. Earth's motion around the sun changes, and with it the intensity and distribution of sunlight. It was Serbian scientist Milutin Milankovic who realized that the gravitational tug of Jupiter and Saturn would lead to 3 periodic shifts that might explain the enormous climatic swings of the Quaternary period. These are the Milankovic cycles. Let me summarize. 1. The elongation, or the eccentricity, of Earth's elliptical orbit shifts from almost completely circular to somewhat more elliptical in a 100,000 year cycle. At the absolute maximum eccentricity, Earth's most distant point from the Sun, the aphelion, is about 13% further than the closest point, the perihelion. One hemisphere will experience summer at aphelion and winter at perihelion, and milder seasons all around. That's the north at the moment. The southern hemisphere is closer to the sun in summer and further in the winter, so more extreme seasons. However, the difference in sunlight intensity due to this difference in distance from the sun is much less than the simple difference due to the seasons themselves, so this shouldn't be a huge effect. 2. The pointing of Earth's axis precesses. It rotates 360 degrees over approximately 26,000 years. In addition, the long axis of Earth's elliptical orbit also precesses. Together, these two effects define where in the orbit the seasons occur. They combine to produce a 21,000-year cycle called the precession of the equinoxes. So eventually, the North's mild perihelion winter will turn into a cold aphelion winter. And 3. Earth's tilt changes. Our spin axis is now tilted at 23.5 degrees relative to the axis of our orbit. This obliquity oscillates between 22.1 and 24.5 degrees over 41,000 years. High obliquity means more extreme seasons, but it's low obliquity that ultimately leads to a colder global climate, because then the highest latitudes, where glaciation begins, never get much sun. Now, Milankovitch predicted that obliquity would drive climate variations because it governs the strength of the seasons. But how can we test this? Paleoclimatology. We can reconstruct our planet's climate history by digging holes. First, glacial ice cores. The most famous is the nearly 4-kilometre deep hole drilled in the Vostok Glacier in Antarctica. This glacier was built up by millennia.
We're going to talk about that next week. So I wanted you to understand
the Earth's atmosphere from that.
Understand what I was saying about how the Milankovitch cycle, his theory, how did I do this? How his theory talks about, okay, let's try to get the earth cold, and that's what he did, right, with this theory. But again, where was the precipitation in that theory? You didn't hear about that, did you? It caused the, maybe if I hit that one, it caused the earth to snow more, right? But you didn't hear that. All you heard was, let's get the earth cold. So as I'm, let me go back. Okay. All righty. So y'all want to, okay, I'm back. So let's talk about the biblical view of the Ice Age, and let's compare the two and see which is more reasonable. Okay? So from a biblical perspective, the flood caused the Ice Age. The flood, Noah's flood caused the Ice Age. You got plenty of precipitation. All right, plenty, right? So, in order to produce an Ice Age, you got to have two ingredients. First, you have to have an increase in evaporation causing more precipitation. It's got to rain up there on those mountains, or snow, doesn't it? And cold continents, which the snow can accumulate over time. So you got to have precipitation, don't you? You remember the fountains of the Great Deep? We talked about that a lot. You know, it wasn't the rains coming down from the sky, it was really the fountains of the Great Deep causing the flood. Well, I talked about those fountains shooting up from the ocean floor like big jets of steam coming up because you had all that heat and the mantle of the earth shooting up. and you get all this water and magma coming up out of the water. Remember, I talked about that. So you have jets of steam and rain that accompanied the flood. So the temperature of the oceans would have increased, wouldn't you agree? Would there have been cold water up north and cold water down south? Or would it have been like bath water all over the world? With all this magma and all this stuff coming up from the center of the earth, what do you think the waters of the oceans felt like? Were they cold or were they warm? They were warm. Been a good time to take a bath out in the ocean. In the North Pole, it would have been warm. South Pole would have been warm. Everywhere would have been warm. So you've got the oceans with a lot of warmth. There's something else that we talked about. The increase in evaporation would naturally lead to more precipitation over the continents, wouldn't it? So when it gets, I'm trying to think of a good example. You know, when the oceans are warm, you know, we have El Nino. And they talk about, you know, the storms they increase because the waters are so warm. That's kind of what's going on here. So you got a whole lot of warm water all over the earth. Okay? And the cooler climate can be explained. Well, so you got to have two things. I said you got to have precipitation and then cold continents. All right. So the colder climate can be explained by an increase of volcanic activity. We talked about that during the flood, didn't we? There are all kinds of volcanic eruptions going on in the earth because you have not only the fountains of the great deep busting forth, you have the continents, the continental shelves crashing into each other. You have volcanic activity going all over the earth. All right. So what happens during a volcanic eruption? What's being spewed out of there? I'm sorry? Lava, ash, all dust, all kinds of things. You know, who remembers Mount St. Helens? And you saw pictures of cars with just piles of ashes on it, right? Imagine that times 100 or times 500. We don't know. You know, Krakatoa is one of the largest volcanic activity, you know, out in the Pacific Ocean. And they just said that, I forgot how many tons of TNT the explosion would be like. Just amazing amounts of power being released. So you have all this stuff being released. They have dust and aerosols in the atmosphere. You know, they say that hundreds of miles away from Mount St. Helens, it was dark. It was dark because all this stuff up in the sky, it blocked all the sunlight. All right? I'm sorry?
Went all the way to Europe.
Yes, it did. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. These particles would stay suspended for many years and block out incoming sunlight. So if you've got lots and lots of volcanoes spewing all into the sky, you've got this big cloud all the way around the earth of volcanic dust and aerosols. So it's blocking out the sun rays coming in. Well, with reduced sunlight, you'd cause cooler temperatures over the continents, where the increased precipitation would fall as snow and accumulate to form ice sheets. So you meet two of the ingredients. You got the precipitation because of the warm waters. What happens to water when it gets warm? It evaporates, right? So we got one ingredient. The other one is cooler continents. They only explain cooler continents, but they can't do, or they don't have a way or mechanism to cause it to rain or snow a whole lot. But with the flood, we got both ingredients to make it all happen. So now you've got cooler temperatures caused by the sunlight's being blocked from the earth. So everything down here is getting cold. If we didn't have the sun, you know, they say if we were just a few, I don't know how many hundreds of miles away from the sun in orbit, what would happen to us as an earth? We'd freeze. If we were a little bit closer to the sun, what would happen? We'd burn up. Now we're getting this freeze because the sun is being blocked out. Does that make sense? So the flood gives the recipe. So ice cores. So he talked about ice cores, didn't he? But what they won't tell you is this. So ice cores reveal volcanic activity extending through the last ice age. In fact, the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets also show abundant volcanic particles and acids in the ice age portion of their ice cores. So when they drill down and they can measure these cores and find out what's in these, what ingredients are in there, what are they finding? Volcanic activity. Boy, the Bible did it again, didn't it? Those pesky secularists just don't know what they're messing with, do they? So when they compare it, they try to compare their brilliance and their man's observations against God's word. Who's going to win? God's word every time, isn't it? So I have a question then. If volcanic activity is such a good cooling mechanism, why haven't the uniformitarian scientists incorporated it into their ice age models? Well, they would have to, maybe. But how long did that guy say those ice ages lasted? A long time, right? Hundreds of thousands of years. So you got volcanoes doing what for 100,000, some 100+ thousands a year? Going off, right? Boy, it's kind of, I'd love to use that theory. I'd love to use volcanism, but, we can't do it because it doesn't fit in our model. So they can't do it. So they realize that volcanic ash and gases cool the planet and they understand all this. But theirs last 100,000 years. There's not enough volcanism to be significant over such a period of time. They just know that. They know that. So they can't use it in their theory, but guess who can? We can. The extensive volcanism that would result from a worldwide flood would have a much greater impact on the climate than historical times. Volcanic ash and gases from the flood would probably take at least 300 years or 3 years to fall out. So what is meant in this statement here, so we got the flood going on. It lasted how long? A little over a year, right? So we have the fountains of the great deep. We have the continental shelves moving, crashing into each other. We have all this tectonic plate moving. We have volcanoes going on. So as they're erupting, all the gases that they threw up in the air is going to take about 3 years to finally clear off. That's what I mean by this statement here. 3 years. At least 3 years. So the earth was not a very nice place to be around in at that time. You didn't want to wax your car because, you're going to get a lot of volcanic ash on your car. So 3 years would be enough time, though, to start the ice age. So here's where it gets cool. So Noah's on that ark. He gets off that ark. Guess what is starting? The ice age is starting. So I'm telling you, this is when the ice age began. Now, has it covered 30% of the earth at this point? No, but it's starting. All right? So if you got those youngsters asking you, Poppy, tell me about the ice age. When did that happen? Right here, right after the flood, it started. You can say that. All right? The eruptions would need to continue for many years, though, after the flood to sustain it. So it kept happening because we still had a lot of movement going on in the earth. We talk about what's the highest point in the earth right now? Mount Everest, right? You think it was always the highest point? No, because the continental shelves, they can measure this. They know that they're still moving and they're getting pushed up. That's what's going on in the tectonic plates. So things are still happening to the world. The floods subsided, but the earth is still going through major changes, major overhauls right now. So geologists recognize that there was extensive volcanic activity during the Ice Age. In fact, Charlesworth writes, and I only put one of his quotes in here, signs of the I forgot how you said it, Pleistocene, it just really means Ice Age, volcanicity and earth movements are visible in all parts of the world. So he recognizes that. He understands that. But when secular scientists recognize something that the Bible say, what do they always do? It's almost 100% of the time. They say the opposite, right? They don't want to recognize it. Remember Mary Schweitzer discovered that dinosaur bone that had the stretchy material in it and blood cells. I showed you the video. What did she keep doing? Every time, retest it. I can't believe that. Retest it. Oh, no, there's just no way it can have blood cells in it. Retest it. They just won't accept the truth. They want to deny. Why? Because it doesn't fit their narrative, right? They don't want to admit the Bible's got it right again. Tambora was the largest eruption. Tambora is in Indonesia, is the largest eruption and is credited with causing a year without a summer. Check this out. In 1816, an unprecedented series of cold spells chilled the northeastern United States and adjoining Canadian provinces. How far is Indonesia from the United States? The other side of the world. What did it do here? Check out this next slide, though. Heavy snow fell in June, and frost caused crop failures in July and August. Even Europe felt the chill that summer. That's one volcano, Tambora. Do we have evidence of that? Yeah, it was written about. So you think McClatchy would have been mad if he's out there planting his crops and then you had heavy snowfall in July? Boy, I didn't see that one coming. Yeah, but one volcano caused a cold snap to almost the whole world. And now we've got multiple volcanoes going off with the flood. And post-flood, yeah, it caused the earth to cool. Major. So when did the Ice Age begin? It started when? After the flood, right? So from a biblical perspective, the Ice Age started, and when I say Ice Age, I'm talking about, you remember I put that definition up there about what an Ice Age is, how it covered large masses of land. So when I'm saying this, that it started around the time of Tower of Babel, it started after the flood, but now at this time it had spread to over 30% of the earth. That's what I'm saying here. Okay? So the people at that time after the Tower of Babel were where on the earth? What part of the earth were they on? In the Middle East, right? So did they see the Ice Age being way down south in the Middle East? No, they didn't. So God, I think at this point, used the Ice Age when he spread those people out, land bridges. And I'm going to talk briefly about how those land bridges formed. And you're going to go, well, they don't show up today. And I'm like, they were there. I promise you. So here we go. All right. So this is when the time God scattered man throughout the world is the Tower of Babel. All right. So how long did the Ice Age last? You know, if you watch those cartoons, Ice Age and Ice Age 2, I think they were out there for a long, long time. But how long did they last? Any clue? Any guess? Okay. Again, from the biblical perspective, the Ice Age lasted 500 to 700 years. Okay. So let's let's see what my next slide is. So let's talk about those land bridges real quick. And I don't mean they were land bridges. Like, we can go to Sardis Lake and we can go across a land bridge, can't we? It's called the Sardis Dam, right? I'm not talking about that. So you have precipitation. We already know that the waters were warm. And so where is that water coming from to snow or ice and snow up on the continents? Where's it coming from? It's coming from the ocean, right? So are the ocean levels going up or down? Going way down. In fact, they estimate today that if you melted the polar caps, the earth would be covered, the oceans would increase, I think, 230 feet. All right? Yeah. So if you have warm water being now turned into snow, being evaporated, moving into the upper continents, the upper latitudes and the southern latitude, you have ice and snow being poured down up there. It's draining the ocean. So the ocean basin is doing what? It's going down. So now I believe this is the way that man can go from A to B and travel. And, God told man to do what? Spread out. And how do those animals spread out? Because they spread out too, didn't they? The same way. So I believe God used the Ice Age for His glory, for man to go out to the world. Does that make sense? I believe that was His mechanism, not the McKelvinovich or whatever mechanism, God's mechanism for man to cover the earth, because He did. He said, go. And they went, didn't they, during the Tower of Babel. So you have, I believe the oceans were even lower than 230 feet, because I believe during that time, of course, the waters were still warm. So you have a lot more precipitation being shoved up in the north latitude and the southern latitude. Rain, the glaciers were bigger and bigger. In fact, we know that the ice sheets have decreased over what? Time. So the ice sheets could have been, they're guessing that the ice sheets in Minneapolis, Minnesota were over 500 feet thick. They're estimating that. 500 feet thick. So you have lots of water forming the ice. The ocean basins drop. Man and animals went across, and we populated the world. That's pretty cool when you think about it. I thought it was pretty cool. So, any comments on that? So, if you get those questions now, you've got a really good answer for little Johnny or little Parker that comes to me and asks me one day, Poppy, how'd they get over to the earth? I can tell you. So, summary. The Ice Age was a real event not that long ago. It didn't happen billions and millions of years ago. A few thousand years ago. Kind of like the flood. It's a major mystery for evolutionary earth science. Go and YouTube it for yourself. Go YouTube. I challenge you. You're going to come up with all kinds of things, but none of them hold water. Noah's flood caused the transitional climate for an ice age. The ice age lasted about 500, 700 years. We don't need 100,000 years for an ice age. We don't need it, do we? There was only one ice age. Only one. And you know what? Only the Bible explains the ice age because of the flood. Do the secularists believe in a worldwide flood? Do they believe in a worldwide flood on Mars? Yes, they do. Have they seen any water on Mars? How much of the earth is covered with water? Boy, that's a lot of faith, isn't it? There will be no future ice age. How do we know that? That's right, but how do we know? What did God promise Noah? A rainbow. He'd never flood the earth again, right? So therefore, we have no future ice age. We can go home and scratch that one off our list and say the ice age ain't going to get me. So the Bible tells us about God's truth about our world, doesn't it? 100% of the time. God's right. How much percentage? 100%. And so hopefully you can have some takeaways tonight to be able to explain some things to your kids or your grandkids. I think it's important that we know how to explain from a biblical perspective and not a secular perspective, because it doesn't work. Only God's perspective works. Any questions? I didn't use the Bible too much tonight. Doesn't throw a whole lot of verses out there, because there's not many on the ice age. Job was enough, that's right. But I think it's pretty cool. I learned a lot this week studying. And like I said, I challenge you to go and study and look for yourself. Look for answers yourself. Because, always be equipped to give an answer, right? And always be equipped to know what God has to say about that. So, any closing comments or questions?
Some Bible people believe in a local flood. How would that, it doesn't, does it?
No way it works. No. Well, first of all, we've talked about a local flood. And no, I know that. But, when you look at the terminology, whole earth, all the mountains, those are talking about the whole earth. And not only that, but water always finds what? The lowest spot. So I guess God may have dammed up, because it's always wanting to flow to the lowest spot. I guess he would have had to dam it up, all around. So no way it could have done that.
Some of the plates tilt up,
Yeah, I don't see that happening.
water self-leveling.
Water is self-leveling. That's 100% correct. Yeah.
But there's places where the plates are tilted.
Agreed. But it says the water covered the highest part of the earth at how many? Right. Yeah, so it went over. Right. So water would have kept just pouring over, right? So.
Well, I was looking for some place low it could go after they tilted.
Yeah.
And have you ever looked at the pictures of the continents? It looks like if you take the water out, it would fit together like a puzzle.
Oh, you're talking about the all the continents together? Yes. Oh, 100%. Yeah, they all do fit. Yeah. Pangea, that's correct. Yeah. But the tectonic plates blew all that. Any other comments, questions?
Well, during the period of the flood, you had volcanic activity plus tectonic activity.
All of that.
So who's to say that the continents didn't spread then?
Oh, they were. They were going. I think it was Larry Vardaman from Answers in Genesis, I believe, talked about not the continents splitting, but there was a continental sprint. It wasn't just this. Even the secularists believe that there was Pangea, and they kind of slowly moved over millions of years, and then here we are. But I believe, like Larry Vardaman, that it was a continental sprint. When they happened during Earth's flood, they all moved at a rapid pace. Yeah. But imagine, though, to your point, is that there was volcanism, tectonic plates, you know, all these things. You had tsunamis, you had all these things, tornadoes, you had meteor showers coming in, the worst storms ever. We can't fathom until we get to heaven one day and go, Noah, what was it really like? You know, or God show us the movie reel. But any other comments, questions? None? All right, Brother Lim, I'm going to